Hi everyone, I'm Gohar Vardanyan and welcome back to a new video. Today we have a very popular piece, Recuerdos de la Alhambra by Francisco Tárrega. As always, for the performance of this piece, you can find the link in the description box and also in the info box. And in this video, we will continue with the lesson. So obviously we can't really talk about this piece without first addressing the technique for tremolo, which is what this whole entire piece is based on. When we're thinking about tremolo, there are two major things to consider. One is how even it is, and the second is how legato it is. The evenness comes from our perception of the rhythm. A lot of times people who play with tremolo that's uneven, they're not even aware that the rhythm that they're playing is kind of limping or galloping. You have to think of the tremolo as 4 notes. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That includes the bass. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And don't think of the bass as a separate thing from AMI. That's going to make it sound, and it sounds like it's galloping. It no longer has that really smooth, sustained effect, which is what the whole reason for playing tremolo is. The reason for this is first the rhythmic perception that we have, or lack thereof, and the second is the independence in our fingers. So you have to physically be conditioned to actually control every single finger you're playing so you can place it in the correct time in the rhythm. What happens is that we kind of think of the bass, where it is, and then we're like, oh, AMI, and we just kind of close our hand. And when you're playing it a little bit too fast, faster than you can control, your hand will close it really fast, but you won't have control of the individual fingers that you're playing, so it'll jump. It's a lot easier to just let go of your hand and do this really, really fast. But if you want to control when you're playing it, then you actually have to time everything and choreograph the fingers to play exactly when they have to and not when it's convenient to just close your hand. So what I found helps with first the rhythmic perception of the tremolo so that you really get it in your ear what even 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 sounds like, so you can recognize when it's limping and fix it, but also with the physical dexterity, the independence, the stamina that it takes to maintain that evenness is not to practice PAMI all the time, but to practice also all the different combinations that you can do with the 4 fingers. So oftentimes, let's say I'm playing Recuerdos, which is pretty often that I use Recuerdos as an exercise for tremolo, is I'll use the A section and I'll play the pattern P-A-M-A, and I'll just repeat that. So I won't alternate, it will always be P-A-M-A, P-A-M-A, so it will be something like this. And when I'm doing this, I make sure that I'm alternating the fingers, so it won't be something like this, where the movement is basically not there and you're just playing like this. That will make your hand bounce. It won't actually teach you to make these fingers more independent from each other. So when I'm playing this, when A plays, M is out. When M plays, A is out. So there's always this movement from the kind of like the root of the finger, from the knuckle joint. So when I'm moving, this is what I'm working on. I'm working on the independence of these 2 fingers. This is more difficult because it's the 2 weaker finger, with the weakest finger being the one that's doubled. But after you do that, of course, you have to listen to your hand. If it gets tired, you stop, you continue the next day, you play slower, but you will gain more strength between these fingers, and these 2 will be more independent and under your control, more so than if you never do it. Then when the A section repeats, for example, I'll reverse the order of the fingers, so I'll still use these 3 fingers, but I will do P-M-A-M. Same idea, kind of alternating. So when M plays, A comes out, and A plays, M comes out. That way my hand also stays very stationary. It doesn't bounce around, because if you're not really following through with the fingers, your hand will start bouncing and it will be like a very small movement. That way your wrist can stay stable. This, what it does is, it also makes you think 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, because it's very difficult to limp when you're playing a pattern that comes back. It's very difficult to actually do. It's easier to slow it down and do it evenly. Now all of a sudden, all your ear is hearing is this very monotonous 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you get used to that sound. Now, when you go back and play PAMI, as soon as it starts to limp, you're going to recognize that it's different, and you'll be able to sort of open up your hand and even out, because first thing is to actually know that you're playing unevenly. I find that sometimes when people play tremolo, they can't actually tell that it's uneven. They think it sounds great, but when you listen to it with an ear that can tell that it's not a quadruplet anymore, you can tell there's some kind of a limp or a gallop in it. So then you could probably guess that when I get to the major section, I do the same sort of thing, but now with these three fingers, with P-I-M. So I'll first play P-M-I-M. So on. And then I'll reverse and do P-I-M-I. This is probably the easiest one because now it's the most independent finger being twice instead of the weaker finger, or the A the first time around. Then when I get to the coda, I start using all three fingers, but instead of playing P-A-M-I, which is kind of the more natural way, I think most people find that closing our hand from AMI is a lot easier than closing our hands leading with the index finger. This isn't 100% of the population, but some people find this actually to be a lot easier, but majority of us, AMI is quicker and more reflexive than doing the opposite. So I do the opposite on purpose, playing the coda or really any of these sections, P-I-M-A. And the whole thing again is to make sure I have a wave going through my fingers and not doing something like this. This is very small movements. It comes from the lack of control of the fingers. I try to make it a wave. So when I plays, M gets ready, M plays, A gets ready. What this does, because it feels like you're going against the grain, like naturally we want to do AMI, because you're forcing to go the opposite way, it's almost like your brain is learning to walk again, and it gets more conscious control of the fingers because you're constantly now monitoring that you don't want to play AMI, you want to do the opposite every single time. So I feel like I'm getting more in touch with every single finger that I'm playing. After doing PIMA a few times, getting more and more comfortable with it, when I switch to AMI, I feel like I'm in so much more control over individual fingers. So instead of now thinking, oh, I'm just doing this really quickly, I can control exactly when I play each finger. So that combined with the rhythmic training that you get from just hearing it 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 all the time, and from the physical training that you got of now having better control over your hand, you can fix the tremolo as it gets uneven. It's natural that if you play a long piece, at some point your hand might get tired and it will start to limp, and as soon as you recognize it and if you have the physical ability, you start fixing it as you go, so you always maintain the evenness. The other thing that we have to really pay attention to when we're working on our tremolo is how legato the 3 tremolo notes sound. A lot of times when we play too fast too soon, or if we're tense, or if really we aren't really moving our fingers freely, the tremolo can sound something like this, where each note of the tremolo doesn't really get a chance to ring, and the next finger comes and mutes it ahead of time, creates silence, and makes it sound staccato. So instead of sounding like this, where these notes almost blend into each other and really make it sound like you're prolonging it, it sounds separated. The reason this happens is when we have very small movements with our fingers, it's inevitable that the next finger is very close to the string and it mutes the string ahead of time, and now you can't hear the note anymore, and then it plays, so it creates silence. But if you're playing with the bigger movement and you have the independence in the fingers and you're really moving from the larger knuckle joint, you can control when that finger touches the string. And really, this kind of goes against some advice when you're taught to practice tremolo by preparing the next stroke. So if you practice this, which is, I've seen a few tutorials where like this is what it's taught. I've never really done it that way because I feel like it has its benefit where you're finding the next place to put the finger, but the problem is that you are teaching your finger now to immediately come and close that string. In reality, when you're playing tremolo, you cannot touch the string at all. You want to be able to train your finger to hit it from a distance. But by distance, what I mean is you have to go through the string and minimize the amount of time you're spending on the string. So if you practice with planting too much, or if that's the only way you practice, you're going to train your hand to do this, to have very small movements. I never really did it that way. I always practiced hitting the string, kind of swinging by it. Even on a second string where the movement is restricted, I still try to make sure that I don't mute the string, because I really want that top note to sound like one long note instead of 3 short ones. And what helps is really always thinking of this wave going through your fingers. And the funny thing is that the louder you get, the bigger the movement actually has to become. And without any planting, because if I really want to push the volume of something, it helps to have momentum behind your finger. So if I plant, and then I have to tense up my hand to kind of play from the location. But if I have momentum behind it, then I can swing by the string, hit it harder, make a forte sound without increasing the tension. It's almost like if you want to break through a door and you're standing right next to the door and start to push from location, you're not going to be able to do it, or you might have to use a lot of force. But if you have a running start and hitting the door as you're running, your inertia will help you break down the door. So I kind of think of playing the tremolo, if I need to get loud, making bigger movements helps with the volume without increasing the tension in my hand. So that's something you have to also really listen to and make sure that these 3 notes are super, super legato. So even when you're practicing very slowly, you almost shouldn't hear the separation. This would be too separated. That would be too separated. So I really would try to blend them. Because what you're doing in practice, that's what's going to get faster. So personally, I concentrate on more freedom. It might be more difficult at first because you do have to develop the stamina to be able to move your bigger muscles when you're playing. And when you do get faster, it is the movement does get smaller. Obviously, when you're playing really fast, the movement is going to reduce just because you don't have time to really move it faster. But if you start at a small movement, then you have nowhere else to go when it gets faster. So I think training your fingers to move bigger and then reducing the movement just naturally by speed, that's the more efficient way to go than to start small or to plant and train your fingers to do these very, very small, tiny movements on the string. Now, all this time we spent talking about the technical and the mechanical aspects of playing tremolo, which is really important because without the evenness and the legato, you can't really be very musical with the piece. Something is going to lack. But to talk about a little bit about the musicality of Recuerdos, or really any other tremolo piece out there, you have to really learn to utilize a lot of rubato when you're playing a tremolo piece. Without it, it's going to sound more like an exercise. No matter how pretty the chord progressions are, if you kind of play it straight, it's not going to have the same movement. It's not going to sing as well. So you have to think like a singer, sing those melodies, and if you feel like it needs to move forward, you need to speed up the tremolo. If it needs to hold back or highlight something, you have to hold back and stretch the bass, for example, and make the tremolo even behind those stretches. So, for example, if I play Recuerdos kind of straight, actually couldn't help myself. I ended up stretching a little bit, but I did some dynamics. I did some crescendo, not a lot, but there was something there. But I kind of kept the timing very strict. It sounded okay, but I feel like it could be so much more musical and so much more dramatic if I utilize a lot of rubato. So, for example, can see how there is a little bit of movement going back and forth, and measures where it was exactly the same harmony for a measure and a half here. I kind of sped up to get over it, to move on forward, to give me some direction. So those kind of things you have to decide for yourself how you want it to sound. You can listen to other players, see where they're taking time, where they're speeding through, just to get ideas. But ultimately you have to sing the melody in your mind and decide how you want to do it. What you need to keep in mind is whatever your sort of tempo is for your tremolo piece, you need to have buffer speed above it, because in order to be able to do the rubatos, you obviously have to play slower than the tempo, but you also have to be able to play faster than your tempo. So if you're playing at the edge of your abilities, you can't really be true with the rubato going in both directions. So you need to pick a tempo where you have some reserve speed above it. Going slower is usually easier, but don't just play as fast as you can. That means you're just always in the red and you won't be able to go anywhere from that. Playing slower, you have to remember that whenever you're stretching the basses, so for example, if I do this, I also stretch the tremolo note. So it's not that I'm just doing this, like separating the bass from the tremolo. You always have to think it's 4 notes. As soon as whatever bass tempo you decide, bass placement, spacing you decide, the other 4 notes have to be equally dividing that beat. So this, now my tremolo is at different speeds. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's always determined by whatever bass pace you set. So remember not to have gaps. That's kind of at first it's hard to control, to always have these 3 fingers like little soldiers following whatever the bass is and always equally spacing themselves in the beat. That you need to really get used to hearing it evenly, singing it, recording it, listening back, making sure that it's even. If you get the rubato and the dynamics and the evenness and the legato, the rest of the interpretation, I feel like that's really individual. The best way to learn is to just listen to a lot of players and see what's the difference between them and analyze for yourself and sing for yourself and kind of come up with your own interpretation. So before this lesson gets way too long, I hope that it answered some of your questions in terms of tremolo. I hope it was helpful, and I will see you next time with a new video. Thank you so much for watching.